The council chamber of Concord Prime stretched upward, like a cathedral built to honor bureaucracy rather than gods. 47 species had representatives in this vast amphitheater, arranged in concentric rings that descended toward the central speaking floor. The seating algorithm was mercilessly honest. Military power multiplied by economic output determined your proximity to the center. The mathematics of galactic influence made visible in architecture. Commander Scarlet Chen sat in the second highest tier, just 3 rows from the upper rim. Earth's designated spot for the past 80 standard years, ever since humanity had stumbled into faster-than-light travel through what the rest of the galaxy considered embarrassingly brute force engineering. Her chair was human-sized, at least. A concession the Brinthari had coded into the station's adaptive furniture protocols after calculating that accommodating human proportions cost 0.003% less energy than forcing them to use standard seating. The Brinthari didn't make such decisions out of kindness. They were insectoids who viewed the universe as one vast equation, and inefficiency offended them more than genocide. Their representative currently occupied a mid-tier seat, mathematical prowess counting for more than their modest military. Scarlet's slate chimed softly, displaying the session agenda through her neural interface. Item 17 of 23. Resource optimization protocols for peripheral sectors. The translation software rendered it in flat, bureaucratic galactic standard, but Scarlet's photographic memory supplied the context from 200 previous council sessions. When the Vrex Imperium discussed optimization, species died or disappeared into labor camps. She kept her expression neutral, the same diplomatic mask she'd worn through 8 years as Earth's chief representative. Before this assignment, she'd spent 12 years in military intelligence, analyzing threat patterns and building predictive models. The Galactic Council thought they'd received a diplomat. Earth had sent an analyst with perfect recall and the patience of stone. The chair recognizes Ambassador Vraxic of the Vrex Imperium. The automated council system announced, its translation matrix carrying the statement simultaneously into 47 neural patterns. Vraxic rose from his third-tier seat, far better than humanity's position, though the Vrex considered it an insult that they weren't centered. He was typical of his species. 6.5 feet of scaled muscle, ceremonial scarring across his snout marking successful campaigns, ridged crest identifying his warrior caste. He moved with the fluid confidence of a predator who'd never encountered anything capable of threatening him. "Honored representatives," Vraxic began, his translator rendering his hissing speech into something approximating diplomatic courtesy. "The Imperium brings before this council a matter of galactic prosperity. Analysis of resource distribution reveals severe inefficiencies in 47 peripheral systems. These worlds consume more in trade support and protection services than they contribute to galactic GDP. Scarlet's fingers moved across her slate in practiced efficiency, recording every word with timestamps and cross-references. Her expression remained pleasant and attentive, the face of a diligent civil servant taking notes. The Prosperity Realignment Initiative, Vraxic continued, would place these underperforming systems under direct Imperium administration for a provisional period of 50 standard years. Populations would be relocated to facilities where their labor can be optimally utilized. Resources would be more efficiently extracted and distributed. The Imperium generously offers to shoulder this administrative burden for the good of all. A holographic display materialized above the central floor, showing the targeted systems. Scarlet's eyes tracked across them with the speed of long practice. 6 of the 47 markers pulsed in the familiar blue of human colonies. New hope perseverance, promise, haven, refuge, and second chance. 9 worlds total if she counted their satellites, home to 40 million human colonists who'd left Earth, seeking space to grow beyond the crowded homeworld. The provisional timeline suggests implementation within 60 standard days, Vrex said. The Imperium welcomes Council input, though of course these systems fall primarily within our security sphere. Which meant the Vrex would do exactly as they pleased. Council input be damned. The 47 species would nod and vote to approve because the Vrex Imperium commanded 8,000 warships and had demonstrated their willingness to use them against anyone who objected too strenuously. Scarlet raised her hand, triggering her request to speak indicator. It took 17 seconds for the council system to acknowledge her. The algorithm prioritized by tier, and humanity's provisional membership status meant she ranked just above species who'd observer status only. The chair recognizes Commander Chen of Earth, the system intoned. Scarlet rose, her movements economical and professional. At 5'6", she was small by most galactic standards, though the Quailocs were shorter and the Brentharis' insectoid forms made height comparisons meaningless. She'd learned early that humans were generally considered cute rather than threatening. Soft-skinned mammals with proportions many species found vaguely endearing. She'd also learned to use that assumption. "Thank you, Council Chair," she said, her voice carrying the neutral tones of someone asking a purely procedural question. "Commander Chen, representing Earth and human interests. For the record, I'd like to confirm that 6 of the designated systems contain human colonial populations totaling 40 million citizens. Would the Imperium's timeline allow affected species to consult with their governments before implementation?" Vrex's inner eyelids flickered, a Vrex expression somewhere between amusement and contempt. The Imperium acknowledges human presence in those sectors. Naturally, all populations would be consulted during the relocation planning phase. The timeline is designed to minimize disruption. "I appreciate the clarification," Scarlet said, still in that same professional tone. "Earth requests the standard consultation period to review the proposal with our colonial representatives." "Of course," Vrex said, his translator somehow managing to convey condescension. "The Imperium understands that younger species require additional time to process complex policy initiatives. Shall we say 10 standard days for Earth's review?" "The standard consultation period is 30 days, Scarlet replied. "As specified in Council Regulation 847B, Paragraph 4. A ripple of movement passed through the chamber, the galactic equivalent of uncomfortable shifting. No one cited Council regulations at the Vrex. It was technically correct but socially suicidal, like bringing a legal contract to a knife fight. Vrex's crest flattened slightly. "The regulation applies to binding resolutions, Commander. This is merely a consultation phase. However, the Imperium can be generous. 20 days should suffice for Earth's considerations." Scarlet inclined her head slightly. Acknowledgement, not agreement. "Thank you, Ambassador. Earth's response will be forwarded through official channels within that time frame." She sat down, fingers already moving across her slate. The exchange had taken 90 seconds. In that time, she'd established timeline expectations, gotten the 30-day standard period acknowledged into the record even if modified, and most importantly, demonstrated that Earth was paying attention and documenting everything. Her slate synchronized with the encrypted quantum-entangled transmitter in her quarters, flagging the session recording for immediate relay to Earth. By the time the council session adjourned, Strategic Command would have full analysis of Vrex's proposal, his body language, and the voting patterns that emerged during subsequent discussion. The session droned on through 6 more agenda items. Scarlet remained present and attentive, her mind filing away every detail even as she appeared to be just another minor representative enduring mandatory bureaucracy. Ambassador Tellman of the Quilox caught her eye as the session concluded. The telepathic merchant species represented one of the galaxy's most extensive trade networks, and Tellman himself was old enough to remember first contact with humans, back when Earth had been convinced galactic civilization would embrace them as equals rather than dismiss them as primitive latecomers. His thought speech touched her mind with the gentleness his species used for cross-species communication. "I'm sorry, Commander Chen. My people remember when the Vrex made similar proposals about Quilox frontier worlds. We lost 30 million to their administrative facilities before we purchased our safety through exclusive trade agreements. I wish we could offer more than sympathy." Scarlett's return thought carried carefully practiced clarity. "Your sympathy is noted and appreciated, Ambassador. Earth understands the constraints of practical politics. Will your people comply?" Tellman's mental voice carried genuine concern. "We'll review the proposal carefully," Scarlett thought back, "and provide our response within the established time frame." She felt his surprise at her emotional control. Most telepaths expected human thoughts to be chaotic and emotion-soaked, but intelligence training had taught her to compartmentalize. Her mind remained professionally calm, even as deeper levels processed the implications of 40 million humans facing displacement and forced labor. Tellman withdrew with a mental bow of respect, his aged form shuffling toward the exit, reserved for mid-tier representatives. Scarlett gathered her slate and made her way up the steep stairs toward the upper-tier exit. The higher you sat, the farther you had to climb, a physical reminder of your status every time you attended session. Her quarters in Concord Prime's diplomatic section were small but efficiently designed. Human standard gravity and atmosphere maintained by the station's adaptive environmental systems. She'd personalized the space minimally during 8 years of residence. A small wooden desk from Earth, a photograph of her parents in Vancouver, and a wall of data storage containing humanity's complete records of every Galactic Council session since first contact. The quantum transmitter sat in a corner, looking like nothing more interesting than a gray metal box 30 centimeters on a side. Inside, entangled particles maintained instantaneous connection with its paired unit in Geneva, allowing Earth to observe Council proceedings in real time despite the 16 light-years of distance. Scarlett interfaced directly with her neural implant, composing her official report while simultaneously reviewing footage of Vrex's presentation. Her training let her write with one part of her consciousness while analyzing with another, parallel processing that would have seemed like parlor trick to most species but represented standard enhancement for human intelligence officers. Priority. Alpha transmission to strategic command. She composed. Council session. 2847. Vrex Imperium proposal threatens displacement of million human colonists under Prosperity Realignment Initiative. Time frame. Implementation within standard days. Consultation period forced to days despite regulation violations. Immediate strategic assessment recommended. All supporting documentation attached. Behavioral analysis. Vrex exhibited standard Vrex dominance patterns, minimal deviation from baseline arrogance. Confidence appears genuine rather than performative, suggesting Imperium High Command considers human resistance negligible. Recommend heightened alert status for all colonial defense networks. Historical parallel analysis. Current proposal matches Vrex pattern used against Quilox 74 years ago, Brenthari Frontier Worlds 112 years ago, and Hectar Confederation 158 years ago. Compliance results in effective annexation and population reduction through labor attrition. Non-compliance historically results in military enforcement operations. Recommendation. Time for deterrence posture may have passed. Prepare for active defense scenarios. She paused, reviewing the message before transmission. 8 years of diplomatic service had taught her to recognize inflection points, moments when political solutions exhausted themselves and harder realities emerged. The Vrex Imperium had been building toward this for decades, absorbing tributary states and consolidating power, while humanity focused on colonial development rather than military buildup. Or, at least, that's what the Vrex believed. Scarlet added one final line to her report. Personal assessment. Supreme War Master Krethix will not accept diplomatic resolution. The Imperium views human compliance as guaranteed and human resistance as impossible. They have forgotten that new species can surprise old empires. She transmitted the report, watching the encryption protocol confirm quantum entanglement and successful delivery. Somewhere on Earth, in the strategic command facility buried beneath the Swiss Alps, her message was already being reviewed by people who'd spent 80 years preparing for exactly this scenario. Humanity had entered the galactic stage as primitives with barely functional FTL drives, granted provisional council membership the way wealthy nations granted observer status to developing countries. Every species had assumed Earth would remain a minor player, grateful for scraps of advanced technology and careful to never offend their betters. Every species had forgotten to ask why humanity had developed such extensive observation networks, such meticulous record-keeping, such careful documentation of every political shift and military movement across 400 light-years of space. Scarlet pulled up her personal files, not the official diplomatic archive, but her own collection of analysis and historical research. 200 years of Vrex expansion, mapped and cross-referenced. 34 species subjugated. 12 rendered effectively extinct through population relocation and cultural destruction. 847 documented war crimes, each one recorded with dates, locations, and evidence that would stand up in any court. The galaxy operated on short memory and practical politics. Species forgot atrocities once the survivors had been absorbed and the threat had moved on to new targets. Humans didn't forget. Couldn't forget, really. Their neural architecture and cultural psychology made long-term memory and pattern recognition into survival traits. Earth had survived ice ages, plague, and nuclear near annihilation because humans remembered what killed them and prepared for it to come back. The Vrex Imperium was about to learn what happened when you threatened a species that remembered everything and forgave nothing. Scarlet closed her files and allowed herself a moment of something that wasn't quite anticipation and wasn't quite dread. In 20 days, Earth would deliver its response. She already knew what that response would be, had known since the moment Vraxic's proposal appeared on the agenda. The galaxy was about to discover that humanity's 80 years of apparent docility hadn't been weakness or fear. It had been observation, documentation, preparation, and patience. 7 days proved sufficient for Earth to compose its response. Scarlet spent those days in her quarters on Concord Prime, maintaining her routine of attending council sessions, taking meticulous notes and transmitting encrypted reports to Geneva. To any observer, she appeared unchanged. The same diligent bureaucrat who'd represented humanity for 8 years, professionally pleasant and utterly forgettable. Only Ambassador Tellman noticed the subtle shift. The Quilox diplomat's telepathic sensitivity picked up something in Scarlet's mental landscape that hadn't been there before. Not anger or fear, but something far more unsettling. Certainty, the kind of absolute conviction that preceded either complete vindication or spectacular catastrophe. On the seventh day, Scarlett filed a formal request for emergency council floor time under Regulation 203A, Response to Existential Threat Against Member Species. The regulation dated back 300 years, created after the Hectar Confederation had been absorbed by Vrex administration before they could formally object. It granted immediate speaking priority regardless of tier status. The council chamber filled quickly once word spread. 47 species sent their representatives, drawn by curiosity more than concern. Most expected capitulation, dressed in diplomatic language. Humanity would request modifications to the timeline, beg for reduced quotas, perhaps offer economic concessions in exchange for partial autonomy. That was how these situations typically resolved themselves. Scarlett descended to the central speaking floor alone, carrying only her data slate. The chamber's translation matrix hummed to life as she reached the podium, her human proportions looking almost childlike in this space designed for larger species. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she activated the holographic display system, overriding the standard presentation format with a priority transmission code that only existential threat protocols permitted. The air above the central floor shimmered, resolving into a three-dimensional timeline that stretched across 2 centuries. "Honored representatives," Scarlett began, her voice carrying the same professional neutrality she always employed. "Commander Scarlett Chen, representing Earth and human interests. I come before this council to deliver humanity's formal response to the Prosperity Realignment Initiative." She gestured to the timeline. Dates and locations began illuminating in sequence, each one accompanied by documentation headers. In the 80 standard years since achieving faster-than-light capability, humanity has maintained comprehensive observation networks across 400 light-years of space. We are, as Ambassador Vrex correctly noted, excellent record keepers. This is what we have recorded regarding the Vrex Imperium. The hologram expanded. 34 stellar systems highlighted in red. 34 species subjugated through administrative reorganization protocols identical to the current proposal. Average timeline from initial proposal to complete population control, 3.7 standard years. Average population reduction through labor attrition and cultural destruction, 67%. Scarlett's tone remained absolutely level, as if reading financial statistics rather than describing genocide. She advanced the presentation. 12 species rendered functionally extinct. Populations reduced below sustainable genetic diversity or cultural continuity thresholds. The Hectar, whom this very regulation commemorates. The Silvani botanical collectives. The Morathi clone families. The Brenthari frontier colonies. That last detail sent ripples through the chamber. The Brenthari representatives' compound eyes focused sharply on the display. Even the insectoid mathematicians hadn't fully documented their own losses. 847 documented war crimes under Galactic Convention definitions, targeting civilian population centers, use of prohibited weapon systems, execution of surrendered personnel, forced genetic modification programs, and systematic cultural eradication. Each incident documented with date, location, and evidence sufficient for tribunal prosecution. The hologram filled with data points, a constellation of atrocity that painted 200 years of Vrex expansion in exact, unforgiving detail. 1.2 trillion sentient deaths directly attributable to Vrex military operations or administrative policies. The number hung in the chamber's air like an accusation. Scarlett let it resonate for 5 full seconds before continuing. These records have been compiled, verified, and submitted to the Galactic Criminal Archives under humanity's observation rights as a council member. They are now part of the permanent historical record. She paused, meeting the eyes of representatives across the chamber. Her expression never changed from professional neutrality. The Vrex Imperium has demanded that 40 million human citizens submit to administrative reorganization. We have reviewed this proposal against 200 years of documented precedent. Based on historical patterns, compliance would result in approximately 27 million human deaths over 4 standard years, with the surviving population reduced to genetically isolated labor groups. Another pause. Scarlett's photographic memory held the attention of every being in the chamber. They could see her processing, calculating, remembering everything. Therefore, Earth's response is as follows: no. The simple word carried more weight than a fleet of warships. Furthermore, humanity invokes the legal doctrine of proportional response with total recall. If a single human citizen is harmed, displaced, or coerced under the Prosperity Realignment Initiative or any subsequent Vrex military action, Earth will hold the Vrex Imperium comprehensively accountable for all documented crimes across 200 years of observation. Not tribunals, not sanctions. Accountability. The chamber erupted, not in the organized chaos of democratic debate, but in genuine shock. Species who'd spent centuries accepting Vrex dominance suddenly confronted the possibility that someone might actually resist. The council chair, a neutral arbiter from the Drakmir Collective, activated his priority override. Order. Commander Chen, you are making serious allegations. I am making documented statements, Scarlett interrupted, which simply wasn't done to a council chair. Every piece of evidence has been submitted to the official archives. Any species present may verify the records through standard information requests. Before the chair could respond, the chamber's priority entrance opened. Supreme War Master Krethix entered with his full honor guard, 20 Vrex warriors in ceremonial armor, a deliberate display of military dominance. He'd clearly been monitoring the session and decided to respond in person. Krethix descended to the speaking floor, his 7-foot frame towering over Scarlett's modest height. His translator rendered his hissing speech with barely contained contempt. How amusing. The mammals have learned to compile lists. He turned to address the chamber rather than Scarlett. Honored representatives, please excuse this display. Younger species often mistake documentation for power. They believe that keeping records of events they were too weak to prevent somehow grants them authority. He looked down at Scarlett, inner eyelids flickering with what might have been amusement or disdain. Commander Chen, your archival efforts are noted. Perhaps when your species matures, you'll understand that the strong do not require permission from the weak. The Imperium maintains order. Order requires sacrifice. Your 40 million will be relocated as planned. No, Scarlett repeated. They will not. Krethix's crest flattened, the Vrex equivalent of a predator's challenge display. And how, precisely, does a species with 30 outdated patrol craft intend to resist an Imperium of 8,000 warships? Will you read your documentation at us? Perhaps bore my fleet admirals with historical citations? You have 23 standard days to withdraw the Prosperity Realignment Initiative, Scarlett said. Her voice remained absolutely level. After that point, Earth will consider any Vrex military action against human interests as an act of war, and will respond accordingly. Krethix actually laughed, a hissing, barking sound that his translator rendered as genuine mirth. The mammals issue ultimatums. How delightful. Please, Commander, explain what responding accordingly means to a species that struggles to maintain FTL stability beyond 10 light years. It means, Scarlett said, and something in her tone made the chamber fall absolutely silent, that you have been warned. What happens after that warning is your choice. But it will be your choice, Supreme War Master. Documented, time-stamped, and remembered. She held his gaze for 3 seconds, a lifetime in diplomatic interaction. Then she deactivated the holographic display, collected her data slate, and walked back up the steep stairs to Earth's second highest tier seat. The chamber remained frozen in tableau. Krethix, standing on the speaking floor, his honor guard arrayed behind him. 47 species watching this impossible confrontation between galactic apex predator and the mammalian species everyone had dismissed as harmless record keepers. Ambassador Tellman's thought speech touched Scarlett's mind as she reached her seat. "Commander, I have never felt such certainty from any being. What did Earth discover in those 7 days?" "Nothing new," Scarlett thought back. "We've had 80 years to prepare." Prepare for what? For someone finally forcing us to stop being patient. The session adjourned in chaos, not the organized kind that Council protocols managed, but genuine, confused disruption as species representatives immediately began filing information requests with the criminal archives, verifying Scarlett's documentation. Within hours, 47 civilizations would confirm that humanity had indeed compiled 200 years of evidence that the rest of the galaxy had collectively chosen to forget. In the private corridors afterward, Tellman noticed species representatives physically distancing themselves from Vrex diplomatic staff. The Drakmir Collective Observer, a species so old they rarely bothered attending sessions, stopped Scarlett in the corridor. "Commander Chen." The Drakmir's translated speech carried harmonics of deep concern. "We have seen this before. Your tone, your certainty. 3,000 years ago, the Forerunner species spoke with that same absolute conviction. They valued memory and patience above all things. They warned the consumption swarms to leave their worlds. The swarms dismissed the warning." "What happened?" Scarlett asked, though her photographic memory had already retrieved every reference to Forerunners in the historical archives. "There are no consumption swarms anymore," the Drakmir said quietly. "No trace of them remains in any records except what the Forerunners preserved. They were comprehensively removed from existence. We thought that capacity died with the Forerunners." "Perhaps it didn't die," Scarlett said. "Perhaps it just waited for another species that remembered everything and forgave nothing." The Drakmir's sensory organs retracted, their equivalent of profound unease. 23 days, you said. 23 days. Will the Vrex withdraw? Scarlett looked at the ancient being. No, they won't. They can't. Backing down now would shatter the fear that maintains their empire. Krethix will double down. And then everyone will learn what happens when you threaten 40 million humans after being warned not to. She walked away, leaving the Drakmir observer standing in the corridor, experiencing something their ancient species rarely felt: fear of what came next. On day 16 of the countdown, 8 days after Scarlett's ultimatum, 7 days before the deadline, Vrex's patience exhausted itself. Supreme War Master Krethix had spent that week receiving reports that disturbed his certainty. Tributary species suddenly becoming difficult about tribute payments, trade routes experiencing mysterious delays, minor species requesting clarifications on old treaties. Nothing overt enough to constitute rebellion, but a collective hesitation that smelled like weakness. The humans had done that. Their documentation, their historical archive, their absurd ultimatum. It had somehow given the lesser species permission to question Vrex authority. That required immediate correction. The mammals needed to be reminded of their place, and the galaxy needed to be reminded that the Imperium didn't negotiate with primitives who owned 30 patrol craft and thought archival work constituted power. Fleet Admiral Corthan received his orders with professional acknowledgement even as his scaled brow ridges pressed together in what another Vrex would recognize as concern. 200 ships for a compliance operation against a species with no meaningful military? It seemed excessive, but Krethix had been clear. Overwhelming force, complete dominance, absolute demonstration. The fleet assembled at the edge of human territory, targeting the colony world designated Xin Shi Wang, New Hope, on human navigation charts. Population: 4 million. Defensive capabilities: according to Imperium intelligence, minimal. Several orbital platforms that scans suggested were civilian-grade industrial fabrication stations. A handful of system defense craft that barely qualified as military vessels. Korthan positioned his fleet in standard subjugation formation, a three-dimensional dome that surrounded the planetary system, cutting off escape routes while demonstrating inescapable numerical superiority. 200 Vrex warships, each one carrying enough firepower to sterilize a continental landmass. He broadcast on all human frequencies. This is Fleet Admiral Korthan of the Vrex Imperium. The colony designated New Hope is hereby placed under Imperium administration per the Prosperity Realignment Initiative. All planetary defense systems will power down. All military vessels will surrender. Civilian population will prepare for orderly relocation. You have 1 standard hour to comply. The response came from one of those civilian-grade orbital platforms, carrying a human voice that spoke galactic standard with careful pronunciation. Fleet Admiral Korthan, this is Commander Yuki Tanaka, New Hope Defense Coordinator. We cannot comply with your directive. You have been warned. Please withdraw your forces. Korthan's translator rendered the words, but something in the original human speech made his crest flatten slightly. The tone reminded him of prey animals making territorial warnings, biologically programmed displays that meant nothing against actual predators, but that the animals performed anyway, out of instinct. Commander Tanaka, you are outmatched by a factor of 200 to 1. I am authorized to use force if you do not comply. I suggest. The censor officer's shriek interrupted him. Admiral, those platforms, they're not fabrication stations. The civilian structures suddenly reconfigured, their camouflage shells dropping away to reveal the truth. Each one was a mass driver network, magnetic accelerator tunnels stretching for kilometers through artificial asteroids that had been carefully positioned over years of preparation. They fired. Relativistic kinetic weapons didn't produce dramatic energy beams or colorful explosions. They simply accelerated solid projectiles to significant fractions of light speed using magnetic fields, then released them along trajectories calculated with perfect precision. The projectiles were small, barely 30 kilograms each, but at 0.4 c, mass and velocity combined into devastating kinetic energy that no shields could completely dissipate. 60 Vrex warships simply ceased being functional spacecraft. Hulls ruptured. Reactor containment failed. Control systems shattered. Some ships broke apart entirely. Others spun away disabled, trailing atmosphere and debris. The entire engagement lasted 90 minutes. The human platforms fired 3 volleys, each one precisely targeted to disable rather than vaporize. The Vrex fleet scattered, their formation collapsing into chaotic individual retreat as captains independently decided that overwhelming numerical superiority meant nothing against weapons that traveled too fast to evade. Korthan's flagship survived, barely, with its engines destroyed and life support failing. His bridge crew worked frantically to stabilize systems while damage reports flooded in. 60 ships lost, hundreds dead, thousands wounded. Against a defensive network that scans had dismissed as civilian infrastructure, Commander Tanaka's voice returned on the open channel, still calm and professional. Admiral Korthan, We are broadcasting medical aid coordinates and emergency shelter locations. All surviving Vrex personnel will receive treatment and assistance. Disabled vessels will be given repair support. You will not be harmed. Corthan's crest flattened completely in confusion. What? You were warned, Admiral. This was your choice. We take no joy in defending ourselves, but we will not surrender our citizens to displacement and forced labor. A pause. You have 14 days remaining. We strongly encourage you to withdraw. Over the next 6 hours, human rescue vessels appeared, civilian transports and small medical craft that approached disabled Vrex warships, broadcasting non-aggression codes. They provided emergency life support, medical supplies, and technical assistance to stabilize failing systems. They offered towing services to vessels that couldn't maneuver. They treated wounded Vrex soldiers with the same care they would give their own. Corthan watched from his damaged bridge as human medics worked alongside his own crew, their small mammalian frames moving with practiced efficiency through the carnage his fleet had suffered. One human doctor, a female with dark skin and graying hair, smiled at him with what seemed like genuine kindness and offered him water. Why? He asked, his translator struggling with the emotional complexity. Because you were following orders, the doctor said. Because you're a person, not a target. Because we warned you and the warning matters more than vengeance. She handed him a data chip. For Supreme War Master Krethix, from Commander Chen of Earth. Corthan played it on his personal display, expecting gloating or threats. Instead, Scarlet Chen's recorded face appeared, her expression neutral and professional. Supreme War Master, Fleet Admiral Corthan has performed his duty as ordered. His defeat reflects no failure of courage or competence. You sent 200 ships against defenses we spent 80 years preparing. Those preparations revealed themselves as required. You have 14 days to withdraw all forces from human space. We will not warn you again, but we will continue to offer medical assistance and safe passage to all Vrex personnel who choose to leave. This doesn't have to continue. The message ended. Corthan looked at the human doctor, his mind struggling to reconcile centuries of Imperium doctrine with the simple kindness this primitive species offered to warriors who'd come to subjugate them. We destroyed 60 of your ships, the doctor said quietly, and we'll destroy more if you force us to, but we'll heal every wounded soldier we can reach. That's the difference between conquest and defense, Admiral. We remember that distinction. The battle footage reached Concord Prime through 17 different monitoring networks simultaneously. Within hours, every species in the galaxy had seen the same sequence. Vrex fleet in standard formation, human platforms revealing themselves, kinetic weapons traveling at relativistic speeds, 60 warships disabled in 90 minutes, and then, most shocking of all, human rescue operations treating enemy wounded with genuine medical care. Scarlet watched the footage from her quarters, her expression unchanged. Her quantum transmitter chimed with incoming communication from Geneva, Admiral James Okonkwo's deep voice carrying through the encryption. Commander Chen, I trust you've seen the results. Yes, Admiral. Commander Tanaka performed precisely as planned. Platform capacity revealed at 30% maximum. Enemy casualties minimized. Message delivered. Krethix won't accept this. It wasn't a question. No, sir, he can't. Backing down now would shatter the fear that holds the Imperium together. He'll escalate. Good. Okonkwo's tone carried grim satisfaction. Then, we'll show him what humanity looks like when we stop being patient. Continue your diplomatic coordination. We'll handle the military response. Understood, sir. Ambassador Tellman waited outside her quarters when the transmission ended. His aged form carried unusual agitation, his telepathic field broadcasting distress that required no direct communication. "Ambassador," Scarlet greeted him. "Your platforms destroyed 60 warships in 90 minutes, Tellman said without preamble. The galaxy believed humans owned 30 patrol craft. You've hidden military capabilities for 8 decades. We haven't hidden anything, Scarlet replied calmly. We simply haven't demonstrated them. There's a difference. Why? Why allow the galaxy to believe you were weak? Scarlet gestured him into her quarters, pouring tea from an Earth-imported samovar, while Tellman settled into a human-sized chair that barely accommodated his small frame. Because we learned something in our pre-FTL history, Ambassador. We learned it through nuclear weapons and world wars and near extinctions. We learned that showing strength invites challenge, but showing restraint invites peace. So we showed restraint. We documented. We prepared. We waited. Waited for what? For someone to force us to stop waiting. Scarlet sipped her tea. The Vrex Imperium had 2 centuries to learn mercy. They chose conquest instead. They could have left humanity alone. They chose coercion. They received warnings. They dismissed them. And now they learn what happens when a patient species exhausts its patience. Tellman's thought speech carried profound sadness. 200 years ago, Kilok's refugees fled Vrex expansion. Our ships were damaged, our people dying. Your colony on refuge took us in, fed us, gave us shelter, asked nothing in return. We have never forgotten that kindness. Scarlet met his eyes. Neither have we, Ambassador. Humanity remembers gifts as clearly as we remember threats. Then I bring you a gift in return. Tellman transmitted a data packet directly to her neural interface, compressed intelligence containing Vrex fleet movements, supply line information, and strategic assessments compiled by Quilok's merchant networks across 200 years. Ambassador, if the Imperium discovers you provided this, let them try. The Quilok's merchant consortium operates across 300 systems. We remember which species showed us mercy and which species destroyed our homeworld. The accounts have been outstanding too long. He stood, his old body moving with renewed purpose. You are not alone in this, Commander Chen. Other species remember. The galaxy has been waiting for someone strong enough and patient enough to finally say no to the Vrex. You just happened to be the ones who said it first. After he left, Scarlet transmitted the Quilok's intelligence to Geneva through the quantum link. Within hours, every human defensive position in 9 colonies received updated targeting data for Vrex fleet movements. The galaxy had shifted. One battle, one display of human preparation and human mercy had changed calculations across 1,000 worlds. Tributary species began quietly discussing contingencies. Economic networks started routing around Vrex trading posts. The monolithic dominance of the Imperium suddenly showed fracture lines, and Supreme War Master Krethix, monitoring reports from his command ship, watched his empire beginning to crack and knew he had no choice. Retreat meant collapse. Escalation meant confronting human capabilities he'd clearly underestimated. Pride, fear, and strategic necessity left him one option: overwhelming force against all human positions simultaneously. If he committed enough ships, surely primitive defensive platforms couldn't stop them all. He began recalling fleets from across the Imperium. Not 200 ships this time, not 600. All of them. Every warship, every strategic reserve, every garrison force. 8,000 vessels converging on human space to crush this upstart species that had somehow hidden military capacity for 80 years and now dared challenge Vrex supremacy. The galaxy watched, horrified and fascinated, as the greatest military mobilization in modern history began. And on Concord Prime, Commander Scarlett Chen simply noted the fleet movements in her immaculate records, updated her countdown timer, 14 days remaining, and transmitted one more encrypted message to Geneva. Admiral Okonkwo, the Vrex are committing everything. Recommend full defensive activation. The response came immediately. Already done, Commander. Let them come. It's time they learned what humans look like when we're done being patient. The Vrex armada dropped out of FTL at Sol Systems' heliopause like a biblical plague made manifest. 6,200 warships materializing in coordinated formation, their emergence signatures creating a cascade of exotic particles that lit up human detection networks across 8 light hours of space. Supreme War Master Krethix stood on his flagship's command deck, surveying the tactical display with grim satisfaction. Every available vessel, every garrison pulled from tributary worlds, every strategic reserve activated, the entire military might of the Vrex Imperium concentrated in one system to crush one primitive species that had somehow forgotten its place in the galactic order. Begin standard subjugation approach, he ordered. Envelope formation. I want Earth surrounded with no escape vectors. His fleet began its advance, a 3-dimensional sphere of overwhelming force that would compress inward until the humans had nowhere left to run. According to intelligence, clearly flawed intelligence, given New Hope's hidden defenses, Earth possessed perhaps 24 orbital platforms and a handful of system defense craft. The humans had revealed weapons capable of destroying 60 ships. Krethix had brought 6,200. Mathematics didn't lie. Overwhelming force would prevail. The first indication that mathematics could be deceiving came 30 minutes into the approach, when the lead elements of his formation started registering incoming projectiles. Thousands of them, small kinetic rounds traveling at relativistic speeds, appearing on sensors with barely enough warning to attempt evasion. Except evasion was impossible. The projectiles weren't targeted at individual ships. They were positioned to deny entire regions of space. Overlapping fields of kinetic kill zones that forced the Vrex formation to compress, to tighten, to abandon optimal tactical spacing in favor of simply avoiding the invisible walls of hypervelocity death. Where are they coming from? Krethix demanded. His sensor officer's crest flattened in confusion. Everywhere, War Master. Asteroid belt, Kuiper belt, Oort cloud objects. There are launch platforms distributed throughout the entire system. Thousands of them. Our intelligence missed. I can see what our intelligence missed, Krethix snarled. Push through. They're wasting ammunition on area denial. Once we close to engagement range. Mars fired. The planet humanity had spent 80 years terraforming, massive magnetic accelerators built into its very crust, disguised as atmospheric processing stations and mining infrastructure, launched its first volley. Not thousands of small projectiles, but dozens of massive ones. Each projectile massed 30 tons and traveled at 0.9 light speed. At that velocity, mass became irrelevant. The kinetic energy release approached fusion-scale detonations. 1,500 Vrex warships simply ceased to exist. Not disabled, not damaged, vaporized. Turned into expanding clouds of superheated plasma as projectiles struck with energies that overwhelmed every defensive system the Imperium had developed across 2 centuries of conquest. The command deck went silent except for damage reports flooding in from surviving fleet elements. 1,500 ships. 1 volley. 6 seconds. Evasive, Krethix began. The human broadcast interrupted him, transmitted on every frequency simultaneously with perfect clarity. Supreme War Master Krethix, this is Admiral James Okonkwo, Earth Defense Command. You have entered our home system with hostile intent after being warned. Surrender now and you will receive mercy. Continue and face extinction. You have 60 seconds to respond. Krethix's claws dug into his command throne. Behind him, he felt his bridge crew's eyes, not just watching, but calculating, judging. 1,500 ships destroyed by a planet, by a world his intelligence had dismissed as a primitive colony barely capable of supporting agriculture. Pride and fear warred in his chest. Retreat meant the end of his position, his authority, his life's work building, Imperium dominance. But continuing meant, what? More losses like that first folly? All ships, he ordered, his voice steady through sheer force of will. Scatter formation. Attack all human colonial positions simultaneously. If we cannot take Earth, we make them bleed across every world they claim. It was the worst possible decision. The human fleet revealed itself. Not dozens of patrol craft, but 800 warships emerging from stealth positions throughout the system. Ships that moved with impossible coordination, communicating and adjusting tactics faster than Vrex technology could match. They didn't close to engagement range. They simply fired from distances that shouldn't have been possible, weapons reaching across hundreds of thousands of kilometers with perfect accuracy. And the electronic warfare began. Commander Cody Reeves piloted his fighter wing through the chaos, watching Vrex capital ships fire on each other as their targeting systems received corrupted data. Human electronic warfare suites, 80 years of development, decades beyond anything the galaxy suspected, turned the Imperium's own weapons against them. Ghost Leader to all wings, he broadcast. Precision strikes only. Engines and weapons. Leave life support intact. Command wants prisoners, not corpses. His targeting computer painted solutions faster than he could process them consciously. Neural interface translating intent into action. Missiles launched, found targets, disabled Vrex propulsion systems with surgical precision. Around him, 799 other human warships did the same. The battle became systematic dismantlement. Human forces moved through Vrex formations like surgeons, cutting away offensive capability while deliberately preserving life. Ships that surrendered received immediate safe conduct coordinates. Ships that continued fighting found themselves disabled and boarded by Marines who offered medical assistance before accepting surrender. 6 hours. That's how long it took to reduce the entire Vrex Imperium fleet from an overwhelming armada to 6,200 disabled vessels drifting in Sol System's outer reaches, their crews alive, but their capacity for violence completely neutralized. On Krethix's flagship, Fleet Admiral Korthan watched his Supreme War Master stare at tactical displays that showed only defeat. Watched him process the impossible, that a species they dismissed as primitive archivists had hidden military capabilities that rendered 2 centuries of Vrex dominance obsolete. Suicide ram, Krethix whispered. All remaining ships with propulsion. Impact Earth's orbital infrastructure. If we die, we take something from them. Korthan's crest flattened completely. Around the bridge, officers froze. A suicide ram against a civilian target, against a species that had systematically disabled their fleet while offering mercy to every surrendered crew. No, Korthan said quietly. Krethix's head snapped around. What did you say? No, War Master. Korthan stood, his hand moving to the ceremonial blade at his belt, not to draw it, but to rest on its pommel with symbolic weight. You are relieved of command. Under Imperium Military Code Article 47, A fleet commander may be removed if their orders constitute certain defeat through tactical incompetence or deliberate waste of Imperium resources. You dare. They beat us, Corthan said, loud enough for the entire bridge to hear. Comprehensively. Totally. We came to conquer and they showed us mercy. Now, you want to kill civilians out of spite? He looked around at the assembled officers. We are warriors, not murderers. Not anymore. Silence stretched for 3 seconds. Then, every officer on the bridge placed their hands on their own ceremonial blades in identical gesture. Unity against their supreme war master. Krethix sagged in his throne, the fight draining from him as he recognized the truth. His empire was finished, his fleet defeated, his authority evaporated. Corthan opened a channel to the human fleet. Admiral Okonkwo, this is Fleet Admiral Corthan. Supreme War Master Krethix has been relieved of command. The Vrex Imperium fleet surrenders unconditionally. We request mercy. On Concord Prime, Commander Scarlet Chen stood in the council chamber's central speaking floor, 47 species watching in stunned silence as the Battle of Souls' final moments played across holographic displays. When Corthan's surrender came through, she allowed herself the smallest smile, the first genuine emotion she'd shown in the chamber in 8 years. Honored representatives, she said, her voice carrying perfect calm. The Vrex Imperium threatened 40 million human citizens with displacement and forced labor. They were warned. They chose violence. The result is now clear. She gestured to the tactical display showing 6,200 disabled Vrex vessels. Earth Defense Command has secured 8 million Vrex military personnel. All are receiving medical treatment, food, and communication access to their families. Wounded Vrex soldiers are being treated with the same care as human wounded, which, as you can now observe, is quite advanced. Ambassador Tellman's thought speech touched her mind with profound relief. You did it. You actually defeated them. We defended ourselves, Scarlet corrected silently. There's a difference. Aloud, she continued, however, defense and justice are not the same as vengeance. Earth formally requests the Galactic Council establish a war crimes tribunal to address 200 years of documented Vrex atrocities. Supreme War Master Krethix will face trial for his personal authorization of actions against civilian populations. But the Vrex people, the soldiers, the citizens, the species itself, are not our enemies. They were led by leaders who forgot that conquest creates resistance and that patience eventually exhausts itself. She paused, meeting the eyes of representatives across the chamber. The Imperium, as you knew it, is finished. But the Vrex species has a future if they choose it. Earth offers them the same thing we offered every surrendered crew: medical aid, safe passage home, and the opportunity to rebuild under leaders who understand that mercy is not weakness, and that remembering history means learning from it. The Drakmir Collective Observer rose, a gesture so rare that the entire chamber turned to watch. Commander Chen, your species demonstrated military capabilities that render existing power structures obsolete. What are Earth's intentions regarding galactic governance? Scarlet's expression never changed from professional neutrality. Earth's intention is exactly what it's been for 80 years. We want to live in peace, trade fairly, and be left alone to develop our colonies. We don't seek conquest. We sought only to be safe from those who did. Now we are. And if other species threaten you, then they'll receive the same warning the Vrex received. And if they ignore that warning, she let the implication hang. Well, you all just watched what happens when patience exhausts itself. Aboard the human flagship Long Memory, Admiral James Okonkwo received Fleet Admiral Corthan in the ship's formal meeting room. The Vrex commander entered expecting a cell, or perhaps immediate execution. Instead, he found a space that resembled an officer's lounge more than an interrogation room, with comfortable seating and a table set with tea service. Okonkwo gestured to a chair designed for Vrex proportions. Humans had prepared even for this. "Please, Admiral, sit. You've had a difficult day." Corthan sat cautiously, his crest flattened in confusion. "You're not... This isn't a punishment?" "No." Okonkwo poured tea, some earth beverage Corthan couldn't identify, and slid a cup across to him. "You're a warrior who followed orders from his superiors. You relieved Krethix when he ordered atrocities. You chose surrender over pointless death. Those are honorable actions. We came to conquer your species. You did, and we defended ourselves. War happened. Now war is over." Okonkwo sipped his own tea. "Admiral, humanity doesn't hate the Vrex people. We documented your empire's crimes because someone needed to remember them. But we understand the difference between soldiers following orders and leaders who give evil commands. You followed orders until those orders became evil. Then you stopped. That matters." Corthan's mind struggled to process this. 2 centuries of Imperium doctrine had taught that defeated enemies were to be subjugated, not given tea and philosophical discussions. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we begin the largest humanitarian operation in galactic history," Okonkwo said. 8 million Vrex personnel need to get home safely. Your wounded need care beyond field medicine. Your ships need enough repair to make FTL jumps without killing their crews. We have medical ships, engineering teams, and supply vessels already organizing the logistics. You're just sending us home? Of course. What else would we do? Keep 8 million prisoners indefinitely? Execute them? We're not the Imperium, Admiral. We remember what justice looks like, and it doesn't look like revenge. Okonkwo leaned forward. Here's what will happen. You'll coordinate with our logistics command to organize safe transport home. Any Vrex who wish to remain and testify at Krethix's tribunal will receive asylum. Any who want to leave will get medical care, supplies, and safe passage. In 6 months, every Vrex soldier will be home with their families. And then? Then the Vrex species gets to decide what kind of people they want to be. The Imperium's tributary species are already declaring independence. We've received 47 formal requests for Earth's guarantee of their sovereignty. The empire Krethix built is fracturing. But that doesn't mean the Vrex people have to disappear. It means you get to choose your own path forward, without Supreme War Masters ordering conquest you never voted for. Corthan's tea sat untouched as his mind processed implications that shattered 200 years of assumptions. Why are you doing this? Because we remember. Okonkwo's voice carried absolute certainty. We remember every kindness ever shown to us, and we remember every threat. We remember what it's like to be on the wrong side of overwhelming force. We remember that soldiers are people, that species are not their governments, and that justice means breaking cycles of violence rather than perpetuating them. He stood, offering his hand in the human gesture of respect. Welcome to the future, Admiral Corthan. It's going to be different than what you're used to, but I think you'll find it's better. Corthan stared at the offered hand for 3 seconds before accepting it. The grip was firm, warm, and carried no threat. Just respect, warrior to warrior. Thank you, he managed, for my crews, for showing mercy we didn't earn. You earned it the moment you chose surrender over atrocity, Okonkwo corrected. That's the difference between a soldier and a war criminal. Now, let's get your people home. 3 months later, Commander Scarlet Chen stood in the council chamber watching the vote conclude. 47 species, unanimous decision. The Vrex Imperium's council seat would be vacated pending internal restructuring, and Earth would assume a first-tier seat with full voting rights. But the real change wasn't in seating arrangements. It was in how other species looked at humanity now, not as primitive newcomers, but as the galaxy's new moral center. Species that had spent centuries accepting Vrex dominance now asked Earth's opinion on territorial disputes. Trade negotiations referenced human fairness doctrines. The Quilox Consortium proposed joint humanitarian initiatives. Ambassador Tellman approached her after the session, his thought speech carrying warmth. "You changed the galaxy, Commander Chen." "We just defended ourselves," Scarlet replied. "The galaxy changed itself." "No. You showed them an alternative. For 200 years, we all believed the strong ruled and the weak submitted. You proved that patience, preparation, and principle could defeat raw power. Every species here is reconsidering what strength actually means." Scarlet looked around the chamber at representatives who'd once dismissed humanity as irrelevant archivists. "We just remembered, Ambassador. Remembered everything. And when remembering everything meant we had to act, we did so with the same care we used in documentation. That's all." "That's everything," Tellman corrected. "The galaxy spent 2 centuries forgetting its conscience. You reminded us we had one." Later, in her quarters, Scarlet composed her final report to Geneva. 8 years as Earth's representative, and now a new assignment awaited, heading the new Galactic Justice Commission, ensuring the documentation and accountability that humanity had pioneered would become universal practice. Final report to Strategic Command. Vrex Imperium dissolved through internal restructuring. Former tributary species granted independence with Earth security guarantees. Million Vrex personnel repatriated safely. War Crimes Tribunal proceeding with full cooperation from Vrex Provisional Government. 0 human casualties in defense operations. Mission parameters exceeded. Personal assessment. The galaxy believed strength meant the capacity to conquer. We taught them strength means the restraint to show mercy. They'll remember that lesson longer than they remember our weapons. Humanity's patience exhausted itself, but our principles remained intact. That's the victory that matters. She transmitted the report and allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Earth had entered the galactic stage as dismissed primitives. They'd left it as moral exemplars, not through conquest, but through the simple demonstration that remembering everything, forgiving nothing, and still choosing mercy over vengeance was the most powerful statement any species could make. Outside her window, Concord Prime sparkled with activity as 47 species rebuilt relationships on foundations of accountability rather than fear. The age of the Vrex Imperium had ended. The age of remembered justice had begun. And humanity, patient as always, would be watching, documenting, remembering, ready to defend themselves again if necessary, but hoping, always hoping, that the lesson would stick this time. The galaxy had learned. Humans don't forgive. Humans don't forget. But humans still offer mercy to those wise enough to accept it. That made all the difference.